Welcome, beloved anointed ones. The loudest lies are always told to cover the quietest truths. Chosen ones, tonight we're stepping into a storm that was never meant for your ears, but it erupted because of you. An explosive fight broke out, and no, it wasn't about money, power, or territory. It was about you. The very person they swore not to think about, not to talk about, not to care about, ended up being the headline of their chaos. Here's a fact. Psychologists say that when people lie about their feelings, the body betrays them before the mouth does. That's why arguments like these spiral out of control, because every forced denial eventually leaks into an uncontrollable eruption. The lies they used to shield themselves cracked wide open, and suddenly those harmless stories they told about you became a battlefield of exposed truths. The irony? They fought harder to cover their hidden admiration, jealousy, and attraction than they ever fought for their own dignity. Think about that. You didn't lift a finger. And yet, entire friendships, alliances, and reputations went up in flames, all because someone couldn't keep their true feelings buried any longer. And let's sprinkle in a little humor here. If you've ever seen people argue over something they don't care about, you already know. It's never about indifference. Nobody throws fists, screams, or breaks bonds over a person who supposedly means nothing. That's like fighting over the last cookie in a jar while swearing you're on a diet. The very energy they spent trying to deny you only confirmed your power. This isn't just gossip. This is revelation. Their fight wasn't about your flaws. It was about the truth they were too scared to admit. And once that truth slipped out, it turned their circle into a war zone, leaving you as the unshakable center of it all. Number 1. They created a story to hide from themselves. They created a story to hide from themselves, not just from others. That's the brutal truth. When people lie about you, most of the time it isn't really about destroying your reputation. It's about protecting theirs. They can't face the reality of how deeply they feel about you, whether it's envy, admiration, or something softer they'd never dare to admit. So instead of sitting with that uncomfortable truth, they build a character out of you that doesn't exist. It's easier to say you're arrogant than to admit they feel small next to your confidence. It's easier to say you're a problem than to admit they can't stop thinking about you. Their lies were camouflage, a shield to protect them from the vulnerability of honesty. What makes this even more powerful is that the story they created about you wasn't meant for the public first. It was meant for their own survival. They were talking themselves out of their true feelings long before they started talking others into it. They couldn't accept that you were affecting them on such a deep level. So they rewrote the script, hoping that repeating the same lies would numb the truth. But here's the thing. No matter how many times a person tells a story, their body remembers the reality they're trying to suppress. That's why their voice shakes when your name comes up, why their eyes flicker when someone defends you, and why their emotions eventually spill out in a fight they never planned to have. The explosive argument wasn't born in that moment. It had been brewing in their private contradictions all along. Their words and their feelings were at war, and that kind of tension always seeks release. They tried to convince others you were insignificant, but their energy betrayed them. Who wastes so much breath on someone irrelevant? Who starts battles over someone they supposedly don't care about? Their behavior exposed them, and when they lost control, the truth came tumbling out. In the end, their story was less about you and more about their inability to face themselves. You became the screen onto which they projected everything they couldn't accept. The lies they told weren't reflections of your reality. They were reflections of theirs. And that's why the fight broke out, because truth doesn't die quietly. It pushes, it scratches, it erupts, and no lie is strong enough to hold it down forever. Number 2, their words were a smokescreen, but their behavior gave them away. Their words were meant to distract, but their behavior exposed them completely. This is where most people trip themselves up, thinking they can craft a story with their mouth that doesn't align with the reality of their actions. They swore up and down that they didn't care about you, that you were nothing to them, that you had no impact on their life. Yet the way they moved told another story. Their eyes lingered when your name came up. Their conversations, even in your absence, always circled back to you. Their energy shifted when you entered a room. No amount of denial could erase those silent betrayals of the narrative they tried to force. The truth is, people can only keep up an act for so long before the cracks show. You can't claim indifference while being obsessed with every detail of someone's existence. You can't convince people you despise someone while defending your lies with such emotional intensity. When their voices rose, when arguments broke out over you, it wasn't because you mattered less. It was because you mattered too much. They couldn't suppress the truth of their obsession, and the more they tried, the louder it became. Their lies became a prison, and every word they spoke locked them deeper into a corner they couldn't escape. Their behavior betrayed them, because actions are harder to police than words. Words are calculated. Words can be dressed up, rehearsed, and delivered like a script. But behavior slips out in the heat of the moment when they're caught off guard. That's why they grew defensive so quickly when you were mentioned, why they reacted disproportionately to simple things involving you, and why they ended up fighting each other. Deep down, they knew they were lying to themselves, but the truth bled through in every movement, every choice, every contradiction. The fight became inevitable, not because you forced it, but because their words and actions couldn't coexist any longer. Their lies had a shelf life, and when that expired, the truth roared out of their behavior in ways they could no longer control. It showed everyone watching that their story about you was never real. What was real was the tension, the attraction, the envy, and the obsession they tried so hard to bury. And in that exposure, the fight wasn't just about you. It was about them being revealed for who they really were. Number 3. The fight wasn't about you. It was about who owned the narrative. The fight was never truly about you. It was about who got to define you. That's the part most people miss. In circles where lies about you have been passed around like currency, power isn't just about who speaks the loudest. It's about who controls the narrative. Each person wanted ownership of your image, to decide how others saw you, and when those versions clashed, it turned their unity into chaos. It wasn't your existence that unsettled them, it was the loss of authority over your story. People crave control, especially over someone they secretly fear or admire. By creating a version of you that suited their agenda, they felt safe. Some painted you as a threat because that justified their envy. Others painted you as weak because that made them feel superior. But the problem with lies is that they don't align neatly. One person's truth about you will always contradict another's, and when the contradictions grew too loud to ignore, they turned on each other. That was the explosive moment. Not you stepping into the room, but their own stories colliding like shards of broken glass. It's revealing, isn't it? They never fought this way over anyone else because no one else carried the same weight in their minds. Your presence disrupted their hierarchy. You weren't supposed to have a voice in the matter, yet somehow you became the silent anchor around which all their noise revolved. And when one lie started slipping, everyone panicked. Because if one version of you was exposed as false, it threatened to unravel them all. The fight became about survival. Whose story about you would stand, and whose would crumble. That's the irony. They thought you were powerless, yet the battle over your narrative proved the opposite. You didn't even need to defend yourself. They did it for you. Their desperation to control the conversation revealed just how little control they actually had. By fighting over who got to define you, they admitted the truth they couldn't say out loud. You're not just another name to them. You're the one they can't ignore. The one who shakes their foundations without saying a word. And in trying to own your story, they ended up exposing their own. Number 4. Hidden desires leaked through their rage. Hatred doesn't come out of thin air. It has a root, and that root is often something people don't want to face. Their rage toward you wasn't just casual dislike. It was a mask covering the feelings they were too afraid to admit. That's why it burned so hot, why it escalated into an explosive fight that exposed them. Because real indifference doesn't argue, it doesn't obsess, and it doesn't break bonds. Their fury was proof of the depth of their hidden desires, the ones they couldn't control no matter how much they tried to bury them. For some it was repressed admiration. They saw in you qualities they longed for but couldn't reach, so rather than admit it, they twisted that admiration into hostility. It was easier to paint you as arrogant than to admit they respected your confidence. For others, it was jealousy that cut deep, the kind that gnaws at the soul. Watching you shine in spaces where they struggled felt unbearable, so they clothed that envy and hatred, thinking anger would protect them from feeling small. And for a few it went even further, attraction they could never admit, an energy that pulled them toward you but terrified them at the same time. That contradiction between desire and denial is a dangerous one, and it always leaks out in destructive ways. Rage became their outlet because honesty would have shattered the image they built for themselves. How could they admit they admired the very person they tried to discredit? How could they confess they wanted to be close to the person they swore to despise? So instead of owning the truth, they let it ferment in silence until it erupted as conflict. Their anger was never really about tearing you down. It was about protecting themselves from the vulnerability of being exposed. That's why the fight spiraled so wildly. It wasn't just words thrown in anger. It was confession hidden inside accusation. Every insult was a clue, every shout a sign of what they wouldn't say out loud. And in the end, their rage told on them. It revealed that you weren't just another face in the crowd. You were the one who stirred something they couldn't control. And the battle they staged outside was only a reflection of the war they were losing inside. Number 5. They lied because the truth would have exposed their weakness. They lied because the truth would have toppled the image they'd been carefully crafting for years. Saying you were admirable, frightening, or beloved would have been an admission that they weren't the unshakable figures they pretended to be. That admission would have revealed their soft spots, insecurities they'd hidden behind jokes, status, or brittle confidence. So they chose fabrication instead. Lying was easier. It let them keep the costume on, perform the role everyone expected, and avoid the shame of being seen as vulnerable. The weird thing about that kind of lie is how defensive it makes people become. Once someone invests their identity in being untouchable, a single honest truth about someone else becomes a threat. They double down, inventing more narratives and recruiting others to back them up, because losing face in front of peers feels worse than being wrong. This is why you see the overreactions and the dramatics. Those extremes aren't about you. They're about protecting a fragile image. Every false story they told was glue keeping together a version of themselves that couldn't survive scrutiny. When the truth about you started to show through, your competence, your calm, your unshakable presence, it wasn't just inconvenient. It was existential for them. Admitting they respected you would mean admitting they'd been measuring themselves against you and found lacking. Confessing fear would mean confessing weakness. Saying they loved what you did or who you were would be an acknowledgement that you had influence they didn't earn, and that's dangerous to their carefully staged control. So they created alternate realities where you were the villain, the fraud, or the irrelevant one. Those lies were shields, and sometimes shields are all people have left. What's important is that these lies rarely hold. They wobble under ordinary pressure because they were constructed from self-preservation, not fact. Lies require maintenance, new excuses, louder voices, staged evidence, and that maintenance eventually frays. When the strain grows too much, the facade cracks, and their insecurity is exposed. The explosive fight that follows isn't about proving you wrong. It's their panic attack in public, the moment when they realize their safety net is gone. So remember this: they weren't trying to break you. They were trying, with all the clumsy cruelty they could muster, to avoid being seen as small. Their lies were acts of defense, not proofs of your failings. And when those lies fall apart, what remains is the raw truth they were too afraid to admit, that you touched something inside them they could not control. Number 6. The fight exposed their double lives. The fight tore through their carefully constructed facades and exposed the lives they'd been living in the shadows. For a long time they managed to juggle different versions of themselves: the supportive friend, the indifferent bystander, the vocal critic. But when the argument erupted, those masks cracked. Suddenly, you could see the raw, unfiltered truth about who they really were when the performance dropped. Some who had praised you behind closed doors finally revealed their admiration, even if they tried to disguise it with half-arguments. Others who smiled in your face let their envy spill out, unable to stomach someone else giving you the credit they secretly thought you deserved. And the ones who pretended you were irrelevant? Their rage at seeing anyone defend you betrayed them louder than words ever could. Double lives can only survive in silence. As long as no one challenges the contradictions, people can wear two faces without being noticed. But conflict has a way of dragging secrets into the light. In that moment, the fight became less about you and more about exposing the duplicity of those involved. Their alliances fractured because people who were united in lies suddenly had to pick a side, continue to uphold the falsehood, or admit the feelings they'd been suppressing. Many couldn't keep the balance. So the truth seeped out through their aggression, their jealousy, or their unplanned admissions. What makes this exposure so powerful is that it proved you were never dealing with just one version of these people. You were dealing with multiple. The friend who seemed supportive in private was the same person who sat silently when others slandered you. The rival who pretended not to care was the one obsessively watching you from a distance. The critic who dismissed you in public was secretly measuring themselves against you in private. And the fight stitched all those contradictions together in a way that could no longer be hidden. This is why that moment mattered. It turned speculation into clarity. You no longer had to wonder who stood where, because the fight showed you plainly. The double lives they had worked so hard to protect came undone, leaving them bare, conflicted, and exposed. And all of it happened because of you, because your presence made it impossible for them to keep living in the safety of their masks. Their truths were dragged into the open, whether they liked it or not. Number 7, you became a mirror. They couldn't shatter, they couldn't break you because you became the clearest reflection of what they refused to face. When someone acts against you with that much heat, it's not random cruelty, it's panic. Your presence held up a mirror they avoided for years, and instead of confronting the cracks it showed in them, they tried to shatter the mirror to avoid seeing the truth. But mirrors don't lie. No amount of noise, gossip, or invented stories could change what the mirror revealed. A mix of admiration they didn't know how to own and shortcomings they'd been hiding behind, posture and posturing. That's why their attacks felt so frantic. Instead of admitting you highlighted their weaknesses, they lunged at your reflection as if destroying the image would erase the deficit. They used jokes, insults, rumors, and loud denials because those are the tools people lean on when they can't repair the thing inside. The arguments weren't really about hurting you, they were about soothing the shame of being seen as less than they wanted others to believe. Their fury was the sound of armor rattling, clumsy, noisy, and ineffective. Your steadiness only made the reflection sharper. The calmer you stayed, the clearer their insecurities looked. You didn't need to fight back because the authenticity you carried made their fictions look ridiculous by comparison. People who live in stories rely on other stories to prop them up. When a real person stands in front of those stories, the stories lose power. That's what happened. Your existence pressed on the weak seams of their narratives until those seams split open. The result was chaos among them, not because you provoked it, but because truth exposed the theater of their lives. What's more revealing is how their behavior shifted after the mirror was shown. Some doubled down into cruelty to erase the reflection. Others tried to mimic you, showing the admiration they'd previously hidden, but failing because imitation without understanding looks hollow. A few retreated into denial, clutching at old lies as if repetition could rewind reality. Each reaction confirmed the same thing. You had become the measure they secretly feared. In the end, being the mirror is a quiet kind of power. It doesn't shout, it doesn't plot, it simply reflects. And when people rage at their own reflection, they reveal more than they hide. The fight over you proved that truth is stubborn. It can't be rewritten by rumor. You stood there unchanged while their attempts to break the mirror only exposed them further. Number 8. Their lies created enemies within their own camp. Lies have a strange way of multiplying until they start devouring the very people who created them. That's what happened here. When they fabricated stories about you, it wasn't just about making you look bad. It was also about boosting their own standing. But once multiple lies were in circulation, those lies didn't line up neatly. Each person had their own version of the truth about you, and pride wouldn't let them yield to anyone else's version. Suddenly, allies who once stood shoulder to shoulder started competing for dominance, desperate to have their story be the one everyone believed. This is where the cracks turned into open warfare. A lie isn't stable. It requires constant maintenance. When several people are maintaining different lies, the contradictions become obvious. Someone claims you're cold and distant, while another insists you're manipulative because you get too close. One says you're irrelevant, another says you're dangerous. The stories cancel each other out, and in that collision, they have no choice but to question one another. Suspicion creeps in, and suspicion quickly mutates into rivalry. The fight that broke out was the natural end of that process. What started as a united front against you dissolved into infighting because no one wanted to be the one exposed as exaggerating, inventing, or outright lying. They began to accuse each other of twisting facts, of making things up, of being the real deceiver. It was betrayal disguised as argument, each one trying to save their own image by tearing down the credibility of the other. In attempting to bury you, they ended up burying trust among themselves. And that's the most revealing part. While they thought they were protecting themselves from you, they were dismantling their own camp from within. The web of lies they spun turned into a net that caught them instead of you. By trying to control your story, they lost control of their own. What was once a shared secret became open hostility, and what was once alliance collapsed into enemies fighting for scraps of credibility. The irony is sharp. They set out to betray you, but in the process, they betrayed each other. And the more they fought to prove their version of the lie, the clearer the truth about you became. Lies cannot coexist with truth, and they cannot coexist with each other for long either. In the end, their camp didn't fall because of you. It fell because of their own dishonesty. Number 9. The fight wasn't planned. It was triggered by the truth they couldn't suppress. The fight wasn't part of anyone's plan. It erupted because truth has a stubborn way of slipping out when people least expect it. Lies demand constant maintenance, like a fragile structure that needs endless repairs. Every time someone told a story about you, they had to remember the details, repeat them consistently, and make sure no cracks showed. But the problem with lies is that they exhaust the person telling them. Eventually, fatigue sets in, and all it takes is one unguarded word, one reaction they couldn't control, for the real feelings to burst through. That's what happened here. The truth they tried to bury rose to the surface, and the room couldn't contain the fallout. The explosion wasn't because someone planned to expose themselves. It was because suppression creates pressure. The more they fought to hide their admiration, envy, or attraction, the heavier it grew. Pressure like that doesn't just fade. It builds until it demands release. In the heat of a casual moment, someone slipped, revealing the very thing they swore wasn't there. Maybe it was a compliment that sounded too genuine, or a tone too defensive, or a laugh that betrayed fascination. Whatever the crack was, it was enough to split their united front. Suddenly, everyone else who had been holding their own lies together panicked, and the argument erupted like a chain reaction. This is why the fight carried so much intensity. It wasn't about you directly, but about them realizing the masks were falling off. One admission, even by accident, risked unraveling everything, and once the thread was pulled, it was impossible to stop. People scrambled to cover themselves, to reinforce their lies, but in the rush they contradicted each other, exposed themselves, and revealed the very truth they had tried to suppress. The beauty of this moment is that it proves a law of human nature. Truth doesn't need an invitation to enter a room. It shows up unannounced, and it forces people to react. No matter how carefully they prepared their stories, the truth about their real feelings toward you lived just beneath the surface, waiting for the right crack to spill through. And when it did, the fight wasn't just loud, it was inevitable, because nothing shakes a lie harder than the weight of the truth it's trying to smother. Number 10. Their obsession with you became too loud to ignore. You didn't hover at the edges. You became the axis everyone kept circling, whether they admitted it or not. At first it looked like casual mentions, like someone dropping your name in a story and moving on. Then it turned into repetition. The same anecdotes, the same complaints, the same comparisons that looped around you like a broken record. That repetition is obsession dressed up as conversation. They said they weren't invested, but every sentence about you carried weight, and their voices changed when the topic came up. When people try to erase someone, they rarely speak about them this much. Silence is the tool of true indifference. The louder the denials, the louder the evidence of fixation. The fight revealed how consuming you had become to them. Arguments exploded because there was no neutral ground left. Every comment about you was met with an emotional reaction, and those reactions kept piling on one another until the pressure snapped. Their attempts to discredit you required constant attention, which only reinforced your presence in the group's mind. They fed the fire they claimed to douse. Someone would overcorrect with an insult, another would defend you with unexpected heat, and suddenly nobody could stop contributing to the drama. Your name pulled people into a gravity well they couldn't escape. This kind of obsession doesn't arrive overnight. It accumulates in small ways: furtive phone checks, private messages about you, jokes that land too long, praise whispered behind closed doors and then violently denied in public. Those back and forths are a form of hoarding attention. They kept you in circulation because their internal conflict required an outlet. You weren't merely a topic. You were the tool they used to measure themselves, to punish their own doubts, to test alliances. When the energy turned into a fight, it proved that they'd been thinking about you far more than they ever wanted to admit. The most revealing thing is how their obsession betrayed their strategy. They wanted to make you irrelevant, but the effort to make you irrelevant made you indispensable to the conversation. Every lie, every rumor, every dramatic retelling was a knot that tied people back to you. In trying to erase you, they created a monument to you instead. That's the paradox. The harder they pushed you out, the more central you became. The fight didn't prove your power, it proved their inability to stop giving you power. And when people can't stop thinking about you, it's not because you're weak, it's because you're unforgettable. Number 11. They didn't want to lose you, but they didn't want others to have you either. The fight wasn't just fueled by dislike, it was tangled up in something far more complicated: possession. They didn't want you gone, but they didn't want you free either. Some of them despised you openly, throwing out insults and denials to convince the world they couldn't stand you. Yet, under that hatred, was a twisted form of attachment. Others, on the opposite side, secretly wanted to keep you close, though they would never dare say it directly. That mix of hostility and hidden desire created a pressure no group could hold for long. At the root of it was control. To lose you would mean losing the influence they once thought they had over you. They couldn't bear the idea of you walking away stronger, independent, or even admired by others. That kind of freedom would shatter the illusion that they mattered more in your life than they actually did. So their hatred wasn't pure rejection. It was fear disguised as scorn. Fear that if you slipped beyond their grasp, someone else would see your worth and claim the connection they themselves couldn't admit to wanting. This is why the arguments turned so sharp. Those who craved closeness to you were threatened by those who thrived on belittling you. They didn't agree on how to treat you, and their opposing desires exposed the fractures between them. On one side were the ones who needed you demonized so they could feel superior. On the other were the ones who needed you humanized so they could justify the pull they felt toward you. Those contradictions clashed until their unity tore apart. What made it worse is that both sides were hiding from the truth. The ones who hated you needed you because their entire sense of identity was wrapped in being against you, and the ones who wanted you near couldn't admit it without betraying the roles they played publicly. So instead of honesty, they turned on each other. Their war wasn't about whether you mattered, It was about who got to define how you mattered. The irony is that while they were busy fighting over whether to claim you or condemn you, you stood outside their grip altogether. Their conflict proved that you were never just another person in the crowd. You were a force that created division simply by existing because no one could hold you entirely. You were too much to dismiss, too different to own, and too powerful to belong to anyone but yourself. Number 12. Your existence disrupted their alliances. Your existence doesn't sit quietly in the background. It forces decisions. The fight that broke out wasn't really about you in a simple sense. It was about what your presence does to people. You disrupt their ability to remain neutral, because neutrality requires comfort, and comfort disappears when truth enters the room. Around you, masks slip, allegiances reveal themselves, and hidden emotions rise to the surface. People who thought they could keep playing both sides suddenly find themselves cornered, forced to declare where they actually stand. The alliances they built weren't as strong as they appeared. Many of them were bound by convenience, by shared lies, or by the illusion of mutual goals. But the moment you entered the equation, all those fragile connections started cracking. You didn't beg them to choose, but your presence demanded it. Those who secretly respected you couldn't keep pretending otherwise, and those who envied or feared you couldn't disguise it anymore. The tension between admiration and resentment is what broke their unity apart. The fight revealed what was already true. Their alliances were brittle, held together by silence and avoidance. You were the test that exposed how shallow their unity really was. It wasn't you attacking them. It was them realizing that their carefully built agreements couldn't hold under the weight of someone they couldn't ignore. That's why things escalated so quickly. It wasn't just anger. It was the collapse of a false foundation. This is the kind of disruption you carry naturally. You don't have to confront or argue to make it happen. Your presence alone shifts the energy in a way that demands clarity. People either step closer with honesty or they step away in hostility. But what they can't do is sit comfortably in the middle. That's why the fight happened. They weren't really arguing about you. They were arguing about themselves in the light of you. What makes this powerful is that you didn't have to do anything but exist. Their alliances shattered not because you interfered, but because you revealed them. That's the disruptive gift of your presence. It doesn't destroy truth. It destroys lies pretending to be unity. And in the end, what broke them was not you, but the fact that you made them face each other without the shelter of disguise. Number 13. Their lies turned into confessions in disguise. Their lies didn't stay lies for long. They turned into confessions wearing masks. In the heat of that fight, every accusation they threw at you wasn't just about you, it was about them. When someone shouted, "You think you're better than us," what they were really saying was, "We already believe you are." When they sneered, "You always want attention," what slipped out was their admission that they can't stop giving it to you. The words they meant to use as weapons exposed the very insecurities and hidden truths they were trying to bury. This is the irony of envy. It has a way of exposing itself. Hatred, when loud enough, tells on itself. They couldn't have fought with such intensity if they didn't feel something stronger underneath. People don't spend that much energy on someone they truly believe is beneath them. The fire in their voices was proof of something they refused to name. You unsettle them because you represent qualities they wish they had, or truths they can't escape. Their accusations then weren't really insults. They were reflections of their own recognition of you. What made this fight so explosive wasn't just the volume of the words, but the hidden meaning behind them. Every sentence meant to cut you down was actually building a profile of how they saw you. They gave themselves away without realizing it. Their own words became evidence against them, showing that they had studied you, obsessed over you, and thought more about you than they ever wanted to admit. The accusations weren't casual. They were rehearsed, detailed, personal. And that level of detail doesn't come from indifference. It comes from fixation. So the lies, in reality, were admissions. They thought they were tearing you apart with criticism, but they were confessing how much space you occupy in their minds. They revealed that you haunt them in ways they don't want to confront. The insults weren't about lowering your value. They were about exposing their inability to diminish it. And that's the part they'll never say out loud. Their rage wasn't just about dislike, it was about recognition. They couldn't ignore your presence, they couldn't erase your impact, and so they turned their unspoken confessions into false charges. But the more they fought, the clearer it became. Their lies weren't hurting you. They were revealing how much truth about you they couldn't contain. Number 14. You became the proof that truth doesn't need a defender. You didn't have to prove anything because the scene they made for you did the proving for you. While they shouted, pointed fingers, and staged evidence, the spectacle itself exposed the hollowness of their claims. People who manufacture stories spend all their energy on performance. Rehearsed lines, coordinated looks, and selective memories. Performances need props, cues, and audiences to hold them up. When the props collapsed under their own weight, what remained wasn't your failing. It was the artifice they'd built to cover theirs. The chaos became the proof. Their frantic efforts to dominate the narrative revealed that your presence was never the problem. Their fear of being seen was. They spent so much time trying to shape an image of you that they forgot how fragile their own image was. The louder they grew, the more obvious it became that they were defending something thin and brittle. You stayed steady, without a speech or a rebuttal, and watching them unravel made the truth obvious to anyone with eyes. The truth needed no champion because it didn't need convincing. It only needed space to breathe. There is a strange dignity in not answering noise with more noise. You didn't silence them by counterattacking. You let their performance do the work of exposing them. Their contradictions, their overreactions, the way their stories didn't line up, all of that formed a pattern that no amount of gossip could hide. People noticed the inconsistency. The more they tried to align their lies, the more the pattern repeated. That repetition turned their claims into evidence against themselves, and that is how truth quietly takes back the room. What's crucial is that truth doesn't require allies when it's clear enough. It waits until the pressure of dishonesty collapses the scaffolding built around it. When that happens, the aftermath reads like an open file. Motives exposed, alliances frayed, and credibility lost. You didn't have to point to a single example because the entire incident did it for you. Their drama became their confession, and everyone watching could see which side had been honest and which had been acting. Standing back while falsehoods implode is not passivity, it's strategic clarity. By refusing to feed their performance, you let the truth do what it always does when given the chance. It reasserts itself. In the end, the uproar weakened their stories and strengthened the reality of who you are. The noise fell away, leaving the truth taller and clearer than any of their shouting ever could. The fight over you wasn't random, and it wasn't about trivial disagreements. It was a revelation. Every lie, every accusation, every burst of rage exposed more about them than it ever did about you. In their attempts to control your story, they revealed their obsessions, insecurities, hidden desires, and fractured alliances. They couldn't escape the reflection you held up to them, and in trying to erase you, they only made your presence undeniable. Their chaos became the proof of your power, their contradictions became the confession of your influence, and their noise only highlighted the clarity of your truth. You didn't need to argue, defend yourself, or prove your worth, because the very act of their unraveling did it for you. You were the axis around which their insecurities spun, the mirror they couldn't shatter, and the force that made them confront the realities they had been hiding from themselves. Every mask fell, every lie collided, and every false narrative collapsed under the weight of its own construction. In the end, their fight was a spectacle that revealed what you've always known, that truth doesn't need a defender, and authenticity cannot be contested by fabrication. What stands now is undeniable. Your existence disrupts, your presence commands awareness, and your reality exposes what others try to hide. They fought, they argued, and they splintered, but none of it diminished you. Instead, it confirmed your power, your influence, and your unshakable presence. They made themselves the story, and you became the undeniable truth that couldn't be rewritten or suppressed. So take this as a reminder. Your strength isn't in how loudly you defend yourself, but in how unshakable you remain when others scramble to define you. They may shout, spin tales, and clash endlessly, but the truth about you stands taller than all their noise. You didn't create the fight. You survived it. You didn't need to intervene. You revealed it. And in that revelation, you became unstoppable, undeniable, and unforgettable. Chosen ones. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more brutally honest revelations. Like this video if you see yourself in this story. Comment below with your experiences. Let the world know the truth about your power. Share this video with other chosen ones who need to see this. God bless you.